Schwinger's Turntable, or welcome back, whatever the case may be. Hope you enjoyed your holidays. Happy New Year. All the best to you and your loved ones in 2022. So what I do here is I'm presently doing a series of debut releases that I have in my collection under the formats of cassette, compact disc, and vinyl. Usually in that order if I have that particular format available to me. So this is episode 4, and I'll start off with cassettes. That's usually the way I do it, and we'll start at 1987 and Faster Pussycat. This is their debut. If you've not heard them, they're kind of a glam rock, not really the hard rock, heavy metal genre, but certainly falls into that glam era of hard rock. What would we know on this one that would be popular? Bottle in Front of Me, Don't Change That Song, yeah, Bathroom Wall. I mean, those are probably the ones that are familiar to most folks. This band, I think, was also featured on the second part to the Western Decline of the Decline of Western Civilization, Part 2. I think they performed a couple of tunes on that. That's a long time ago. And yeah, they were featured on that. And that was probably, what, 90? 89? Somewhere in there. But that's a debut from them. I actually have their follow-up to that as well. On cassette, you know, it's not something that's heavy rotation for me. It's okay. But certainly a memorable cassette that was played a lot in 87, late 80s for me. So that's their debut. Next up, we'll have 1988, and this vocalist is probably one of my favorites of all time. Really love his original band, but also things that he did afterwards. Unfortunately, has since passed away, but I'm talking about Ultra Omega OK by Soundgarden. This is their debut. They had done a couple of EPs prior to this, Screaming Life and Fop. In fact, I think around 90 or so, after some moderate success, they reissued that as a one album combining the two EPs, Screaming Life and Fop. From 86 and 87 respectively, I believe. But this is their official debut, and this is an original copy. At that time, the label they were on was SST. So yeah, great album. I mean, it's the original lineup before Ben Shepherd took over duties on bass. The original bass player is still present on this one, on the debut. Hiro Yamamoto. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, or if I even remember that. Yeah, Hiro Yamamoto. He was the original bass player before Ben Shepherd. Ben Shepherd, I actually think, came on the scene in 90, so shortly after that. Third release I have as a debut is 1989, and these guys are huge here in Canada and have been right from the very get-go. Almost. I mean, their EP, I think, was pretty obscure, not all that well known. But as soon as they released this one in 89, the Tragically Hip, up to here, they trended way up. And this is a great album. Just straightforward rock. Another band where, unfortunately, their lead vocalist, Gord Downie, passed away in October of 2017. Brain cancer. Cancer sucks. And thankfully, I have a family member who has just had successful surgery regarding that. Love you. But yeah, Gord Downie passed away. But this album, I mean, songs such as 38 Years Old, New Orleans is Sinking, Boots Are Hearts. It's almost like a compilation album because there's so many good tunes on here. Blow It High Dough. I mean, if you've not heard it yet, it's just straightforward rock. Right up there with other Canadian acts, in my opinion, like Triumph, Rush, Helix. Well, I mean, those are more, Helix especially is more into the hard rock metal. These guys are not. But, you know, great debut by the Tragically Hip, 1989. So what I'm going to do, as I alluded to, after I do the cassettes, I'll move on to just a couple of the CDs. I'm trying to keep my videos much shorter than previously. They were running into that 30-minute time frame, and that's too long for me, and it's most certainly probably too long for you. I mean, I hope you enjoy them, but that's the idea, is try and keep them a little shorter. So gonna go on to my compact disc, and one of my favorite band, not favorite bands, but certainly favorite vocalists, appears on this debut from 1975. This is the guitar player cut his teeth with Deep Purple, and of course I'm talking about Richie Blackmore. Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. This is their debut. Essentially, when Richie Blackmore just wanted to do something solo, right? So he was just decided he was going to do just a single. At the time, went into the studio, recruited Ronnie James Dio and Gary Driscoll, who were playing with a band called Elf at the time. And once they cut a track by, it was actually a cover tune of a band from 69, 70, Quartermass. They recorded that tune, Black Sheep of the Family. And the B-side of that was going to be Richie Blackmore's 16th Century Greensleeves. But once they did those sessions, I guess it was going well. So they decided to do an entire album. And this was the result. Love this album. I remember, I think, one of my older bros having it on 8-track or the like. And just remember that image of, you know, the Stratocaster as a castle on the mountain. And again, I can't emphasize enough, I just love Ronnie James Dio's vocals. And this is just a super, super album. I can't decide sometimes which one is I like more. Is it the debut or Rainbow Rising, the one that the follow-up to this? Of course, Dio would depart and went on to sing vocal for a couple of Sabbath albums, Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, and then Dehumanizer. And in fact, because of legal reasons, they did another one called Heaven and Hell, the album, but the band, because they, for whatever reason, legalities, they couldn't call it Black Sabbath. Another great album. But anyway, this is the debut. I'm getting into so much about Ronnie James Dio just because, as I alluded to, he's just one of my favorite vocalists. But yeah, 1975's Rainbow, Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. Awesome album. If you haven't heard it, definitely got to check that out. Especially if you're into like hard rock, metal. That's kind of that's kind of where it sprung up from. This is, we're talking mid-70s here, right? In early 70s. The time when hard rock was defined by the likes of Sabbath and Zeppelin and Uriah Heep, Deep Purple, and of course Richie Blackmore being from Deep Purple. There's many I'm not including there. I personally love Sweet, Nazareth, a lot of them. So anyway, 75, another one from 1975. This is his first solo effort, but had released obviously several with the Alice Cooper Band. This is his debut solo album, Welcome to My Nightmare, and I guess Alice Cooper just wanted to do a concept album, and it was basically based on a boy named Stephen and his journey through the dreams that he was having. And Vincent Price appears on here. I mean, he's probably in the pop culture world best known for his appearances with Michael Jackson on Thriller and whatnot. But essentially, it's Alice Cooper and mostly Lou Reed's band. Lou Reed, those of you who've heard of Lou Reed, it was essentially his band that played for Alice Cooper on this album. A couple of those members are actually from here in Canada as well. But yeah, Only Women Bleed, I mean, The Black Widow, Welcome to My Nightmare, I mean, Department of Youth. The entire album is just, it's a concept album, so you have to kind of listen to it in sequence to really appreciate it, I think. Sometimes when you hear songs individually, it doesn't really, but it's subjective. It's depends on your how you take it in, I suppose. But great album, 1975, Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare. That's a good one. I don't have a whole lot of Alice Cooper in my collection. I can kind of take it or leave it, but I do appreciate his place in, especially during that time in the 70s. Stuff he did on the 80s, for me personally, got a little more comical, and it was never meant to be taken serious. Obviously, it was. He's he's a character. Alice Cooper is a character, right? Two different people on and off the stage, and but that album, yeah, that's the one that I think is a must, along with the stuff he did with the Alice Cooper band, Killers, School's Out. I mean, yeah, awesome. From there, I'll move up to something that's much, well, I guess by younger people's standards, maybe not that recent. To me, still relatively recent. 1993 and their debut. Tool. Love Tool. Undertow. This followed their Opiate EP from 92. But this is start to finish, awesome album, awesome band, in my opinion. Everything they've done. There's haters, obviously. I mean, they're very, I think, kind of in the metal world. They're polarizing, but whatever. I don't care too much about that stuff. Just a great, great album. Also features a guest appearance by Henry Rollins. Those that are familiar with the punk, hardcore punk in the 80s, I mean, he was the vocalist for a band called Black Flag. Also did stuff after with, you know, the Henry Rollins band. Appears on the track Bottom on here. And interesting, before Tool was formed, Maynard and Danny Carey, who is the drummer for Tool, I love Danny Carey. He's an amazing drummer. They actually played in a band called Green Jello, and they ran into some issues where they had to change the name. So what they did is they just added the omelet, you know, the two little dots over the O. So I guess it sounds like green jelly, but it's still spelled Green Jello. Kind of a way to get around that and say, you know, up yours. But and probably I think the song most people would be familiar with Green Jello is Three Little Pigs, and Maynard appears on that track. But yeah, him and Danny Carey were both in that band. That's their debut from 1993, Tool Undertow. Awesome album. I mean, it's heavy. It's metal for sure. And everything they've done after, I really like their latest, which is, you know, there was about a 14-year break between 10,000 Days and their latest of Fear Inoculum. But that's fine. It was, to me, kind of worth the wait. Might be a stretch, but phenomenal album. And the last of the CDs is kind of a shout out to one of my nephews, who introduced me to this band. I had not heard of them, and he mentioned them to me just as we were sharing some of our musical interests at one time. And I checked them out, and I've since purchased a couple of their albums. They're also a Canadian act. But shout out to my nephew Michael for introducing me to these guys. Protest the Hero. Kind of a progressive metal, if you're into that kind of thing. That's definitely what this is. Kazaya, I think that's how you pronounce that one. Correct me if I'm wrong, leave a comment or something. But I don't pay a whole lot of attention to, you know, the pop culture world or read things. If I'm interested in something, I'll research it myself, typically. I don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to hearsay, but, you know, when my nephew recommended these guys, I definitely went and checked them out. I have a couple of their releases, and it's all good stuff. But only if you're into that progressive metal type, which I like most things, as I alluded to, you know, hard rock metal. I'll usually at least give it a listen, and then decide from there. Well beyond the years of much peer pressure getting to me. So if I like it, I like it. If I don't, I don't. That's the way music should be, right? But yeah, that was something introduced to me by my nephew. He's much older now. He's a man himself, but great suggestion by him. And good couple of releases I have in my catalog by those guys. So I'll move on to the vinyl now, and so that's the only cassette and CD I'm going to present in my debut episode 4. The vinyl, I'll start with 1965. These guys, pardon me, just gotta wet my whistle, getting dry. Cheers, everybody. 1965, and these guys should be in the same conversations as the likes of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, I mean, Cream, Yardbirds, all those phenomenal bands from the 60s. And that is the Who. My Generation. This is their debut from '65. Yeah, I mean, come on. Daltrey, Townsend, Keith Moon, for me, just one of the best drummers of all time. And Whistle. I mean, the bands that they influenced, I don't think can be overstated. Certainly all the bands that come later on, even the bands like Zeppelin and Sabbath, and I mean, who do you think they were listening to? This is where, that's how it works. But yeah, this is their debut, and a little tidbit about the sessions of this album, at least, is they called in Jimmy Page, who was a session musician around London at the time, because he was the only one that had the a fuzz box. It's an effect for the guitar that they were looking for. He came into the studio and I guess laid down some rhythm, which I don't think appears on this album, but certainly on the B side of I Can't Explain, which came out shortly after, I think, this. The B side was Bald Headed Woman, I believe it's called, and that's Jimmy Page playing on that. Just the rhythm section. I mean, Pete Townsend doesn't need anybody to play lead guitar for him. Phenomenal in his own right. So, but yeah, just a fun fact. Yeah, the associations. It's a small world, the music world. I mean, especially back then. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. 1965, The Who. The next debut is going to be from '76. Love these guys. They were introduced. Well, I was just a kid, but my older siblings, had these albums laying around. This is Cheap Trick, their debut album. Good stuff. Always got a kick out of the name of their drummer, Bun E. Carlos. Love his drumming. Live at Budokan is still one of my favorite live albums ever. But they were a comical band. I mean, they had their shtick, right? They're entertainers, but really good at entertaining. They went on to have massive success with albums that came after this. I mentioned Live at Budokan, Dream Police, huge. I think it's a must-have. But their comedy shows through even on the early releases, maybe all the releases, I don't know, but certainly on vinyl. If you look, you may be able to see it's a side A. But if you flip over, the other side says side 1. So essentially they did that because their claim was they had no B-side material to put on here, so it's side 1 and side A. It's awesome. I love Cheap Trick. Yeah, I think if you have not checked them out, check them out. In fact, it blows my mind sometimes, but I'm in my 50s, so it's going to happen. But I do hear sometimes people who have not heard of Cheap Trick. Another channel I watch in a violent community, the gentleman there had recently just heard of Prism, which is another great Canadian band, and that blew my mind. But there's so much music out there. If you're like me, you want to check it all out. There's a few genres I'm not so interested in, and I know that, so I don't bother. But I'm usually open to most things, and this is a great album, great band. Not a great album. It's a good album, but that's their debut, 1976, Cheap Trick. Next up, I have 1978, and kind of one-hit wonders, but the opening track on this album, to this day, I still love it. When I hear it, I crank it, but it's probably the one and only tune they're most known for, and that's Sniffin' the Tears, not Sniff and Tears, Sniff in the Tears. I just often hear people call them Sniffin' Tears. Fickle Heart, the opening track is Driver's Seat, and that was their big hit from this. I mean, it didn't go to number 1, but I think it got up there. I mean, maybe top 10 or top 20. So they had some pretty good success with this album back in '78. I still love that track, though. Like I said, to this day when I hear it, I usually crank it. And some of that is, sentimental or nostalgia, whatever. I mean, we all listen to music because it reminds us of either people, places, things, or all of the above. And certainly, I love this album, and specifically that track, Driver's Seat. If you haven't heard it, check it out. And maybe as I go along, I might get a little more proficient at this and add some links. I'm fairly new to the whole YouTube community and vinyl community, but I'll be learning how to do that stuff as quickly as time permits, essentially. And maybe even by my next episode, I'll certainly try it, but I'll try and link some of the highlights to my video, maybe the songs to a video or something that represents the song, so you can check it out and you can hear it is what I'm talking about. Mind you, can do a pretty easy search nowadays, right? Just type in driver's seat. You can do it right now. Go ahead, and you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's awesome. Just got that straightforward rock groove I'm talking about. I was alluding to that with Tragically Hip. That's, you know, again, I like hard rock and metal, but anything essentially, if it's got a good driving beat behind it, I'm gonna give it a chance. So that's 78, Sniffing the Tears. This one is going to be from 1982. It's kind of just two people working together. It came together. I think the one gentleman was from was it Ultravox? I think he played in Ultravox, and the other person was a relatively unknown, Alison Moyer. You may know who I'm talking about. A phenomenal vocalist, and this is from 1982. Outside of North America, I reside in Canada. Outside of North America here, they're, I think, known as Yazoo. Here it was Yaz, and I'm talking about 1982's Upstairs at Eric's. It's a phenomenal album. I mean, I certainly never appreciated it as much then, or maybe to a degree I did. Of course, you know, I was a fairly young teenager then, so I did go to, you know, school dances. Our community had a rec center that put on dances, and my buddy, who had a DJ band, often played those dances. So they'd be setting up their lights and their audio equipment and equalizing to songs like Situation, which appears on the North American copy here. The European copy, and I guess other parts of the world, that song Situation, which was only released as a single, is replaced by Tuesday on the album. But this one's got Don't Go, Only You. But my favorite track on here is a pretty quirky one at the end of side one, called In My Room. And again, there's one of the ones I would provide a link for, but you can probably just type it in, Yaz or Yazoo, In My Room. It's pretty quirky, but I can put this whole album on and listen to it back to front nowadays, whereas back then I might hear these tunes at a dance and I'd be okay with it, but when I go home, I was putting on Sabbath or Iron Maiden, Priest, Motley Crue, Wasp, Van Halen, stuff like that, right? Metallica. Well, this was before Metallica, but certainly Maiden, Priest, and Sabbath, and Zeppelin, stuff like that. But great debut, 1982, Yaz, Upstairs at Eric, or Yazoo, as it were, in other parts of the world. I'll end it off with some Canadian content again. Guy out of Montreal, which is also not that far from where I am. 1982's Aldo Nova, and this was huge. I mean, I think he sold millions of copies of this, and actually did all right on the Billboard 200 in the U.S. I think up to number 10 or maybe even higher. But that would have been with what was it? Fooling Yourself. But certainly Fantasy. That was another huge one on here. Never was able to replicate the success he had with this one. But great album. Love this. This is another one of those ones I can put on and flood it with memories on this one. Yeah, every track on it, because I used to listen to the whole thing. Then it was on cassette for me personally. Side one and then flip over side two, back to front. It's all good, but it's of a certain, I mean, it's a certain rock sound. It's certainly not heavy metal or hard rock, or I wouldn't even consider it that. But Fantasy has certain tendencies towards that heavy metal, hard rock sound. In fact, I've heard some people categorize them as such, but then again, I've heard people categorize bands like Foreigner and whatnot, which are great rock bands, but they're not hard rock or heavy metal in the scope of what I define as such anyway. But that's going to do it. That's I'm going to wrap it up at that. That's part 4 of my debut series. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you're new, I hope you return. If you are returning, I hope you return again. Either way, please subscribe. Just helps the algorithms, so I can get more views on it. And there's a notification button that you can hit so that when I do post the next video, you'll be notified, and hopefully that won't be too far off. I'm going to try to do them, no set schedule, just when time permits, but try and keep them shorter than they had been previously. And yeah, so I appreciate you stopping by here at Twanger's Turntable. I'm Twanger, and thanks for joining me, and enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend. Keep turning your turntable.